And good morning, everybody. I'm John OLoughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And this morning it's Monday, 11:08 a.m. on March 27th of 2023, and we're finishing up March very quickly. It's also time for me to finish the chapter called the Cliveden Set out of Ordo by David Livingstone. And it's been a pleasure for me to get introduce myself and you to this really remarkable collection of essays that's posted there. It's actually 6 volumes. You can get copies on Amazon or directly from the website ordoabko.ca. That's .ca for Canada, of course. And boy, what a resource it is. So it would take a long time to read through the entire um, 6 volumes. And I'm just recommending that you make sure that you have it at your uh, at your disposal when you need to know something that might be obscure in other places. It's remarkable resource. Well, I just want to let you know I had a great visit this weekend at the Center for Political Information. I was happy to receive a book by from Caleb Maupin, the president or director of that organization, and got to meet a lot of very interesting people. Um, really was never before so deeply enmeshed among a bunch of radical people that are very committed to action, and I applaud them for that. We can't get anywhere without action, and the type of political philosophies represented are leftist. They're very much on the socialist side of things. And however, they want to make sure that you don't confuse them with the Communist Party USA. Fair enough. A differentiation I'm happy to pass on. But check out the group. I was there when our friend Garland Nixon gave his presentation, and also Scott Ritter. I'll probably post some excerpts from those because I was able to videotape some of it and, make some comments about that in a show real soon, hopefully even this week, if I get time to do some editing. I'll take a second to go over to the Rumble channel and say hello if anyone has checked in. We have 200 people on the Rumble channel now, and thank you all for subscribing to McDuff Lives. That's all one word on Rumble. And let's see what this one looks like. Okay, nobody in the chat room over there, so I see some folks in the chat room here on my StreamYard feed, which includes Facebook and YouTube. So good morning, Steel Magnolia, Steel to Laura and Corky, and everyone else who's with us or listening to the replay. This is part 3 of our reading of the Cliveden Set out of the book Ordo ab Chao, and it might not be a long show. I think we've just got a little bit more text to get through, but I really want to complete this part because it just blew my mind when I read all of these connections. I knew about the Cliveden Set. I did not know that the Cliveden Set and the Round Table were essentially the same people. And then you throw in people like George Bernard Shaw, the Fabians. It's a remarkable, and Americans now come in with the Harriman family, Brown Brothers Harriman, of course. So I'm just scrolling through to get where we were. We learned about this character named Ernst Hofstangl, and I wanted to remind you of his name. It's an unusual name, but his name will come up in other contexts, especially as we get into the 1940s. just remind you a little of the text here. Humstengel was intimately associated with Aleister Crowley's friend and co-conspirator Hans Ewers, and who worked the secretive propaganda cabinet of Max Warburg's associate, Dr. Bernard Derenberg, and Harvard professor Hugo Münsterberg. Ewers was also an associate of Guido von List, Lanz von Liebenfels. These are the kind of this esoteric economics types that are also connected to the Tula Society and the, the kind of wealthy supporters of what turns out to be Nazism after it goes through a few changes. We read about the Mitford sisters and how extremely diverse their interests were, from one being a communist, another being a Nazi sympathizer, and others connected to various political parties, such as the Oswald Mosley fascism, the British Union of Fascists. And then, of course, the Churchills. The sister named Unity Mitford was a friend of Pamela Harriman, the great niece of Jane Digby, who coaxed Unity into taking her to tea with Hitler in 1937 in Munich. The connection of Averil Harriman to Hitler should not be underestimated. All right, the next section was about Princess Juliane von Hohenlohe, who is called the Nazi princess. And she apparently had relationships with everybody. Rothschild, Oppenheim, Duke Karl Alexander of Württemberg, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. The varieties of her contacts: Asquith, and Lord Rothermere, who we mentioned earlier in the first section of the reading. Then, of course, they all connect to the Fabian Society through Ethel Snowden. Stephanie was invited by Hitler, along with her friend Fabian Society member Ethel Snowden, to attend the Nuremberg Nazi Party rally in 1935. She wrote about the tribal excitement of Nuremberg, a shrine of Nazism, an orgy of dedication to the Nazi creed. The next section is about Prince Philip and his membership of the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family, which then connects to the White Russians, Tsar Alexander II and Nicholas I, and then they're all connected, of course, to Queen Victoria. A long and extensive family tree of Prince Philip follows that just shows you how all of these people are connected in a kind of a way that reminds me of Sean Ross's work over at his great YouTube channel, Jure, Giureh, in which he connects the noble families of Europe, going all the way back to Egypt and the diaspora of the Egyptian powers into Europe, where they brought with them their skills such as building things like big stone castles, which were not known before the dispersion of the Egyptians into Europe. A story that is hard to swallow when you think of its 3,000 years old story. On the other hand, these people are all connected at the top, and they all think of themselves as elites for some reason. What could that reason be except for their common ancestry to the ancient nobles of Europe? And the ancient nobles of Europe would be connected to earlier nobles. And it makes sense to me that Professor Sean Ross has figured that out right. Fascinating work over at his YouTube page, and I encourage you to check him out too. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the next subject, all connected deeply to the Rothschild family, which you don't know that unless you read this. January 20th, 1936, George V died, and the Prince of Wales ascended the throne as King Edward VIII. However, he was not in communion with the Church of England, which meant that he was violating their rules against marrying a divorced person if the divorced person's spouse still lived. Well, that sounds kind of technical to me, but perhaps it was more important back then when the nobility was trying to create an image of some type of um, moral leadership. Well, he refused to abandon his relationship with Wallace Simpson, of course, of Baltimore, Maryland, right? Edward left Britain for Austria, where he stayed at Schloss Ensfeld, the home of guess who? Baron Eugen Daniel von Rothschild and Baroness Kitty de Rothschild. At the request of Britain's Queen Mary, Hermann Goering granted safe passage to Eugene's brother, Baron Louis de Rothschild of Vienna. Remember, the Rothschilds spread out to 5 cities in Europe, and one of them was Vienna. Of course, when the Nazis took over Vienna, the one thing that they made sure and do would be to take the national treasury and all of the gold and all the money out of Vienna, and that's what they did. Um, well, the banker Baron Louis de Rothschild was stuck there in Vienna with his money, and certainly the idea of the Nazis taking him hostage and holding him for ransom makes sense in hindsight, and it looks like there was some, brotherly love there between the Nazis and the Rothschilds that allowed them to work out that deal. Doesn't make sense in terms of the narrative that we're told, does it? Doesn't make a bit of sense. And yet, here you have the Warburgs and the Hitlers and who knows else, all of them connected through the Cliveden Set. Well, we covered the Munich Agreement and how this Chamberlain, you know, was really believed that the best thing for Britain was to let the Nazis be Nazis. And the last section that we touched upon is called War or Peace in America. And I'll go ahead and share that on the screen so you can follow along with me if you like, or stop it and read it yourself later. So there's another mind-blowing fact. I've heard, of course, of Sir William Wiseman, who was kind of the mentor of William Stevenson, and so therefore an extremely important man in the 20th century when you're trying to understand the history of the secret intelligence operations and intelligence services, quote unquote. Sir William Wiseman, British intelligence agent, round table member, and partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Now, remember, if you haven't been following our show with David Underdown and his studies and explanations of these banking families and banking connections, Kuhn Loeb is a arm of the Rothschilds in America. And it seems that they set up kind of two competing banking systems, one with JP Morgan, which was anti-Semitic, and then the Kuhn Loeb, which of course is Jewish. So these two financing arms would appear to be opposed to each other, right? But like a lot of the Hegelian dialectic driven projects that go on, the power behind the scenes clearly is running both of them. And then here we have, not only is he part of Kuhn Loeb, but one of the most important British intelligence agents of the 20th century and a member of the exclusive Round Table itself. So Stephanie von Hohenlohe and Wiedemann visited the United States in 1937, where they linked up to fraternity friends such as Sosthenes Bain, Walter Teagle, and Edsel Ford. The book, which I read about a year and a half ago, called uh, Trading with the Enemy by Charles Higham, is a terrific source for this if you're not familiar with the fact that the business interests of Sosthenes Bain of IT&T, Walter Teagle of General Motors / DuPont, and Edsel Ford of Ford are all connected to this cartel idea of IG Farben and the Wall Street bankers that business as usual is going to happen even in wartime. And that's what they did. So that's how they justified, if they did, the selling of oil and important machinery, patents, and commercial systems, as well as what else? Scientific discoveries, uranium, the whole idea of a nuclear bomb. These are basically commercial items that are traded back and forth. And um, the idea of total war can't happen if you're going to preserve the money of these business interests, right? So Sosthenes Bain makes his IT&T telephone services available to everybody, not just Americans, not just the Germans, but everybody. And he provides a golden telephone to the Pope so the Pope can keep informed of everything. Walter Teagle doing business with the Nazis, and so also did Henry Ford. So that point is made here as well as in Charles Higham's really important book, Trading with the Enemy. Fleeing from Britain after war was declared in 1939, Stephanie, that's Princess von Hohenlohe, the Nazi princess, joined Wiedemann in San Francisco, where she was put under surveillance by the U.S. government. When she arrived in the port of New York, the FBI was already there because the head of the Secret Service, Edgar J. Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, sorry, editors, you missed that one, assumed that she and her friend Wiedemann would spy on Nazi Germany. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, she was arrested by the FBI and interned in the United States as an enemy alien. According to the SCHAD, SCHAD, on November 27, 1940, Stephanie and Wiedemann met Sir William Wiseman, the former head of British Secret Service in Washington and now a partner in Kuhn Loeb and Company, who was working on behalf of a group headed by Lord Halifax, the new ambassador for Britain in the United States. Brigadier General Sherman Miles, the chief of military intelligence, suggested that Wiseman was a member of the same group of Englishmen that had negotiated with the Nazis in the past through men like Axel Wenner-Gren, Torkild Rieber, and James D. Mooney, an American engineer and corporate executive at General Motors, which was run by the DuPont family. As David has often reminded us, that General Motors is DuPont. James Mooney, of course, with the DuPont an executive with DuPont. And let's not forget who is Torkild Rieber. Torkild Rieber is Texaco. All right, a Norwegian oil baron who was the head of Texaco. In April 1939, Mooney had met with the Emil Pool of the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, of course, and the Reichsbank. The BIS is set up to facilitate trading with the enemy, basically, and to preserve the capital of the powers, the financial powers behind the war, to make sure that the banks don't lose money no matter who wins the war. So Mooney had met with the BIS and the Reichsbank and Helmut Wohltat, who was working for Hermann Goering, on a 4-year plan for the German economy. A month later, Mooney met Nazi officials in Germany and discussed various issues concerning GM's Adam Opel facility. Mooney arranged for a meeting in London between Wohltat and Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, yes, JFK's father. The purpose was to discuss possible loans in exchange for more open trade conditions. In December 1939 and January 1940, Mooney met with President Roosevelt and obtained authority for informal discussions with the Nazis to better understand their aims. In March 1940, Mooney first met with Hitler and then with Goering. He presented Roosevelt's views to both men and recorded their replies. Werner Gren was a Swedish entrepreneur and one of the wealthiest men in the world during the 1930s. That's Wenner, Wenner hyphen Gren, Gren. Werner Gren was reported to be a friend of Goering, whose first wife was Swedish, and in the late 1930s, convinced himself that he could avert the coming World War by acting as a conduit between Goering and the British and American governments. His efforts proved unsuccessful, with all parties regarding him as a self-promoting nuisance without much influence on the plans of the Nazi regime. A dejected Werner Gren retired to his estate in the Bahamas, where he resumed his friendship with the island's governor, Edward, Duke of Windsor, formerly known as King Edward VIII. In February 1941, the right-wing journalist Fulton Oursler published an interview in Liberty magazine with the Duke, that's, the former king, at Government House in the Bahamas. The Duke declared his approval of appeasement and said, quote, the peace cannot be another Versailles. Whatever happens, whatever the outcome, a new order is going to come into the world. It will be buttressed with police power. When peace comes this time, there is going to be a new order of social justice, quote unquote. The Windsors visited James Mooney in Detroit in November 1941, the month before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now that's significant, along with David's theory about the banking system of Detroit and a number of the connections with Detroit elites to the Nazis. It's a suspicious time, is it not? November 1941, the Windsors visited James Mooney in Detroit. In 1939, on the advice of von Ribbentrop, Charles Badeau met Gerhard Alois Ruestrick, an agent of, quote, the fraternity and an associate of Allen Dulles, and hired him as his lawyer. This is Gerhard Westrick. In 1940, Westrick traveled via San Francisco, where he handed $5 million of Farben/ITT money on ITT Chief Sosthenes Baines and Ribbentrop's joint authorization to Wiedemann. Westrick also met with Torkild Rieber, a Norwegian immigrant to the United States who became chairman of Texaco. Rieber met Goering in 1940 and was given a message from Hitler to President Roosevelt inviting him to support Berlin's plan for a European Union, led by Germany, which would open its doors to the United States. I'm going to stop for a second and just make a comment that isn't it the opposite of what's happened now, in that the European Union has opened its doors to to the United States. Um, no, the United States rules the European Union now, and why? Well, it's the success of these business as usual folks that have turned the European Union into exactly what they had planned. The synarchists had planned this European Union all along, and the alliance with the American corporations means basically that World War II was not what we think it was. It wasn't a conflict of ideologies, and it wasn't even actually a race war so much as it was a war of conquest, a war of destruction, a war from which these plotters could and did profit immensely. Roosevelt rejected the offer. On June 26, 1940, one day after the surrender of France, Westrick sponsored a celebratory dinner at the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Attendees included Torkild Rieber, Sosthenes Bain, Mooney, Edsel Ford, as well as Philip Dakin Wagner of Underwood and William Weiss of Sterling Products. Sterling Products, remember? Yeah, yeah, the connection to Fauci's father, right? Criticism of the dinner was published by the Chicago Daily News, Time, Life, and the New York Herald Tribune. Early in 1940, the recently founded PM magazine published a series of articles that attacked Mooney for his contacts with the Nazis. The magazine accused him of pro-German views and criticized a speech he had made, later printed as an article in the Saturday Evening Post entitled War or Peace in America. Wiseman, remember the intelligence guy, then went on to have a meeting with Herbert Bayard Swope, the famous journalist, who conveyed a message from Lord Beaverbrook. Sorry about these. The owner of several important newspapers, that he was trying to arrange a meeting with Lord Halifax. Over the next few days, Wiseman had a series of discussions with several high-level diplomats, including Little Hull of the State Department, a cousin of Cordell Hull. Hoover reported to President Roosevelt that the object of this encounter was to work out a plan for persuading Hitler to make a separate peace with Britain. Quote, the princess, of course, this is Princess Stephanie von Hohenlohe, stated that she had not seen Hitler since January 1939. Wiseman then suggested that Hitler might think she was going to Germany on behalf of the British. In reply to this remark, the princess stated that she would have to take that chance, but that Hitler was genuinely fond of her and that he would look forward to her coming, and she thought Hitler would listen to her. When the FBI leaked the contents of these undercover meetings to British intelligence, Wiseman was warned not to have any more contacts with Princess Stephanie and Wiedemann. There were several meetings between Wiseman and former President Herbert Hoover, Herbert Bayard Swope, and others, quote, apparently on the matter of the negotiated peace. In May 1945, Princess Stephanie was released on parole and returned to Germany, where she cultivated influential connections in post-war German society. The link. And here's a picture of Hitler and Tula Society member Rudolf Hess. In the summer of 1937, according to MI6 files in the Ministry of Defense in London, Charles Beddoe met with the Duke of Windsor, Beddoe's close friend Errol Flynn, Rudolf Hess, and Martin Bormann in a secret encounter at the Hotel Meurice in Paris. At the meeting, the Duke promised to help Hess in contacting the Duke of Hamilton, who was a member of the Cliveden Set and the Anglo-German Fellowship. The Duke of Hamilton had a direct link with Himmler and Baron Kurt von Schroeder of the Schroeder Bank and the Worms Bank through their common membership in Frank Buchmann's moral rearmament movement. And it's a picture of Douglas Hamilton, the 14th Duke of Hamilton, member of the Cliveden Set and the Anglo-German Fellowship. In 1936, Hamilton had attended the Summer Olympics in Berlin. In Berlin, he attended numerous functions, including a grand dinner for the British contingent hosted by Joachim von Ribbentrop, where he was introduced to Hitler and other leading members of the Nazi government. Hamilton had previously met Ribbentrop in London as the ambassador to the court of St. James. Hamilton was invited by Hermann Goering to inspect the newly reinstated Luftwaffe for his professional interest in aviation. Hess chose Hamilton because he was a friend of Karl Haushofer, who was also a close friend of fellow Tula and Aufbau members General Ludendorff and Dietrich Eckart. In 1923, when Hitler and Hess were imprisoned after the Munich Putsch, they were visited by Haushofer, who spent 6 hours visiting the two, bringing along a copy of Friedrich Ratzel's Political Geography and Clausewitz's On War. In Germany, Hamilton had met Karl's son Albrecht Haushofer. Under the Nuremberg laws, Haushofer's wife and children were categorized as Mischlinge, the German legal term used in Nazi Germany to denote persons deemed to have both Aryan and Jewish ancestry. His son Albrecht was issued a German blood certificate through his protege Rudolf Hess's help. Albrecht had studied alongside Hess at Munich University. Hess and Albrecht shared an interest in astrology, and Hess also was keen on clairvoyance and the occult. It's a picture here of British intelligence officer Ian Fleming, creator of James Bond, modeled on sorcerer John Dee. You know who he was, right? He was Elizabeth I's sorcerer and secret intelligence agent. Hitler decreed in 1939 that Goering was his official successor, and sorry, here we go, and named Rudolf Hess as next in line. Through Beddoe and Flynn, Hess hoped to ensure an alliance with Britain that would continue despite Hitler's conquest. When Paris was occupied by the Germans during World War II, Beddoe became acquainted with leading Nazi and Vichy figures. After the fall of France in 1940, he was appointed as economic advisor to Vichy and France and the Reich. In October 1941, he was designated by the sabotage branch of the Abwehr to command a covert mission to Iran to capture the refinery at Abadan from his former client, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, and protect it from Allied bombardment prior to a planned German military invasion of Iraq and Persia. On January 13, 1943, Beddoe was in Algeria, allegedly supervising the construction of a German pipeline when he and his son were arrested by the Americans and kept in custody without charge for a year. Beddoe was eventually flown to the U.S. and committed suicide using an overdose of barbiturates while in FBI custody in Miami, Florida, awaiting charges of trading with the enemy and treason. Although the plan was postponed, efforts were made by Hess to meet with Hamilton on several further occasions, which finally led to his dramatic landing on the Hamilton estate in Scotland on May 10, 1941, where he hoped to arrange peace talks. Anthony Masters in The Man Who Was M, The Life of Charles Henry Maxwell Knight, has claimed that Hess's trip was part of a scheme devised by British intelligence officer Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, modeled on sorcerer John Dee. According to Masters, Fleming laid the trap in 1940 after he read about the Anglo-German organization The Link in the intelligence file of its founder, Admiral Sir Barry Domville, also a member of the Anglo-German Fellowship. The Link generally operated as a cultural organization, although its journal, the Anglo-German Review, reflected Domville's pro-Nazi views and attracted a number of anti-Semites and pro-Nazis, particularly in London. Domville had already visited Germany in 1935, being impressed by many aspects of the Nazi government, and was invited to attend the Nuremberg Rally of September 1936 as a guest of Joachim von Ribbentrop. The link was investigated by Maxwell Knight, and I want to make a footnote to remember to see if this Maxwell Knight is any relation to Robert Maxwell, head of counter subversion in MI5 and future role model for James Bond's boss, M. The organization closed in 1939, shortly after the start of the war. By way of an agent, Fleming fed Hess disinformation that the link had been driven underground and was in a position to overthrow the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, and negotiate peace, and that the Duke of Hamilton was prepared to serve as a negotiator. Domville was also friendly with Hastings Russell, the 12th Duke of Bedford, to whose estate Hess had attempted to fly. Hastings was the son of Herbrand Russell, the Marquess of Tavistock, and a Knight of the Order of the Garter, after whom the Tavistock Institute was named. And when I mentioned the Order of the Garter, you should look at Sean Ross's work on the Order of the Garter. It's very, very interesting and quite thoughtful way to view what that organization really is. And now we've brought the Russell family and Tavistock together, right, as we approach the end of this section. Herbrand was also the great uncle to Bertrand Russell. And Bertrand Russell, the author of the section at the beginning of my book on my dad about what happens to people whom they raise up but retain their love for their fellow humans. And that, of course, connects it all to McDuff. Hastings, the fourth richest man in Britain, bankrolled a number of fascist causes, including the British People's Party in 1939, which was headed by John Becket, a former Labour member of Parliament, who had also been a member of the British Union of Fascists and the National Socialist League, a short-lived Nazi political movement in the UK immediately before World War II. The National Socialist League ideology was based on a document published by founding member William Joyce entitled National Socialism Now, in which he declared his strong admiration for Adolf Hitler, but added that what was needed was a specifically British Nazism. Anglo-German Fellowship member and conservative MP Jocelyn Lucas also developed clandestine links with the NSL. Connections were established with the Nordic League, an influential secret society chaired by Archibald Ramsay. The Nordic League originated in 1935 when agents of Albert Rosenberg's Nordische Gesellschaft arrived in Britain to establish a UK branch of their movement. At the start of 1940, Hastings corresponded with the Home Secretary Sir John Anderson after obtaining a document from the German legation in Dublin that Russell claimed contained Adolf Hitler's draft proposals for peace. On March 13, 1940, Domville then organized a meeting for both men, Mosley and Imperial Fascist League veteran Bertie Mills, to discuss a plan of action. Mosley proposed the creation of a peace government to be led by David Lloyd George, although nothing more came of the initiative, as the government soon launched a crackdown on far-right activity. Although a number of leading figures were interned, Hastings' nobility helped to ensure that he avoided arrest, along with other fascist leading noblemen. Spandau number 7. Masters also claims that Hess selected the date of the flight after he was informed by his astrologer, Ernst Schulte Strathaus, that there was going to be a rare alignment of 6 planets in the astrological sign of Taurus at the time of the full moon on May 11th, 1941, exactly one day after his landing in Scotland. Hitler, who had not authorized the flight, saw it as a betrayal or the act of a mentally ill person. He ordered that all supporters should be arrested. On the morning of May 14th, Schulte Strathaus was arrested and taken for questioning by the Gestapo. In the course of the investigation, parapsychologist Gerda Walter, Albert von Schring-Notzing's assistant, was arrested and interrogated about her correspondence with Schulte Strathaus. During the interrogation, Walter explained that she had seen Schulte Strathaus as an enthusiastic supporter of Schrenk. Schulte Strathaus transferred to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. According to John Harris and M.J. Troe in Hess, the British conspiracy report that there is circumstantial evidence that Hess was lured to Scotland by the British Secret Service. Violet Roberts, whose nephew Walter Roberts was a close relative of the Duke of Hamilton and was in the political intelligence and propaganda branch of the SIS, was friends with Karl Haushofer and sent a letter to him in which Hess took a great interest prior to his flight. Haushoff replied to Violet and suggested a P.O. box in Portugal for further correspondence, which was intercepted by a British mail censor. Speculation from Edvard Benes, head of the Czech government in exile, and his intelligence chief, František Moravec, who worked with SIS, or SO1 PWE as it's more specifically called, was that British intelligence used Haushofer's reply to trap Hess. In his statement to the, I'm skipping a couple paragraphs here. In his statement to the court at Nuremberg, Hess claimed that he had predicted in advance that numerous of his foreign Nazi colleagues would make false confessions and incriminate their associates, and he implied that it may have been the result of mind control. Hess cites a large Paris newspaper, Le Jour, which apparently revealed that the Moscow show trials employed, quote, rather mysterious means. He quoted the Völkisch Observer, which reprinted from Le Jour. These means make it possible for the selected victims to be made to act and speak according to the orders given to them, quote unquote. According to Hess, this latter point is of tremendous importance in connection with the hitherto inexplicable actions of the personnel in the German concentration camps, including the scientists and physicians who made these frightful and atrocious experiments on the prisoners, actions which normal human beings, especially physicians and scientists, could not possibly carry out, unquote. Now, this is me making a comment again. We're reading about something that happened in 1940, what, 41? Oh, the Nuremberg trials, 46, I think. So Hess is saying that they have mind control that is effective enough to get physicians and scientists to do the horrible things that they did in Auschwitz and Sachsenhausen and elsewhere. And of course, it was at Sachsenhausen that the experiments were done on Jewish prisoners to see if they could infect them with hepatitis and to create a hepatitis vaccine, which of course would have military use in order to protect their soldiers against a disease theoretically caused by a virus that could then be hopefully on their behalf weaponized. And of course, that weaponization of hepatitis is another theme that ties this story to McDuff, who died of cancer after having been infected in some mysterious way with hepatitis. Hess also remarked that those assigned to him while he was a captive in England were also in an abnormal state of mind, as their eyes were glassy and like eyes in a dream. The same was the case with the British Army doctor who attended him, who he named Dr. Johnson, a Scotsman. Hess notes that the reports of the Moscow trials also describe the defendants as having strange eyes. Only 7 prisoners were finally imprisoned in Spandau prison after World War II. The prison fell under the British sector of what became West Berlin, but it was operated by the four-power authorities to house the Nazi war criminals sentenced to imprisonment. Arriving from Nuremberg, the 7 were Konstantin von Neurath, Erich Raeder, Karl Dönitz, Walter Funk, Albert Speer, Baldur von Schirach, and Rudolf Hess. On April 30th, 1945, after Hitler's death, and in accordance with his last will and testament, German Admiral Karl Dönitz was named Hitler's successor as head of state, with the title of President of Germany and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. Funk had been Hitler's Minister of Economics, who succeeded Hjalmar Schacht as head of the Reichsbank. Of the 7 prisoners, Dönitz, Speer, and von Schirach were released after serving their full sentences. Raeder and Funk, who were given life sentences, were released earlier due to ill health. Between 1966 and 1987, Hess was the only inmate in the prison, and the warden, Eugene K. Bird, who became a close friend, wrote a book about Hess's imprisonment titled The Loneliest Man in the World. Hess served a life sentence in Spandau prison, where he died by hanging himself in 1987 at the age of 93. After Hess's death, the prison was demolished to prevent it from becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. Oh, really? Hess might have been some other reason it was demolished, don't you think? Maybe some DNA, perhaps? Hess's son, Wolf Rüdiger Hess, believes that his father was keeping a secret that he was unable to share, and that was the reason he was kept in prison and ultimately murdered. Soviet authorities had indicated to Hess's son that Gorbachev was soon to allow his father's release. Dr. Hugh Thomas is convinced that Hess was murdered to keep him from revealing the treasonous activities of his secret British contacts during the war. Certain documents that Hess brought with him to Britain were sealed until 2017. When the seal was broken in 1991, the documents were missing. Various conspiracy theories have suggested that the man imprisoned at Spandau was not Hess, but a double. This was the subject of David Irving's Hess, The Lost Years, and has been the theme of at least 2 novels, Spandau Phoenix by Greg Ellis, The Separation by Christopher Priest, which considers an alternate history where Hess's peace mission was a success. So the overwhelming impression that I have right now is that this 20th century wars, the big wars, were waged in order to consolidate control over large territories in Europe principally, but also in the United States and around the world, under the control of a cartel of banking interests. And you look to the Bank of International Settlements as the functioning center of this banking cabal, where the depression of the 30s was caused by the manipulation of money, the taking of money out of the American economy, hiding it in various places, but making it useful to others so that they can do things like, say, rebuild the war machine of Germany so that they can proceed with another war. And now, with Germany prostate, we have the American war machine expanding around the world in a desperate attempt, I think, to conquer the entire world by limited wars under the umbrella of the so-called mutual assured destruction theory, that as long as we have these nuclear bombs aimed at each other's big cities, we cannot have a total world war. Therefore, the limited wars that are going to happen, how can you stop them if, the powers that be are going to let them happen? And that's what's happening right now in various places in the world, Syria, you know, um, Ukraine, the various former Soviet republics. We don't even hear about the wars that go on there, but Chechnya was one, and then Georgia, Kosovo, all of the horrible wars around the periphery of the remainder of what used to be the Soviet Union, and now, of course, China. Well, it's that same group, is it not? The ones that won World War II while creating a system of deceit, propaganda, mind control, and exploitation of innocence that has been the real America since World War II. This country should have been the wealthiest country in the world by far by now. And if it were not for the intervention of these financial powers that are still controlling us through their control of things like NATO, things like the mafia, things like the other mafia, things like ISIS. And who knows, maybe they even control Vladimir Putin. I don't know, but we need to know if we want to maintain our citizenship in a free country. Thank you very much for being with me this morning, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I'll be doing a minefields tomorrow at 11 a.m., and I haven't done one in about 2 weeks, so got a lot on my mind I'm looking forward to sharing with you. Thanks again for being with me. Thanks for your support over at Patreon/John OLoughlin. And thank you very much for everybody on Facebook, everybody on YouTube, everybody watching on Twitter, and especially all of the folks who have joined my new Rumble account. Now I have 200 followers there and looking to get to 2,000. So spread the word about our Rumble. We're not going to be worrying about YouTube strikes anymore after we get started over there.